I've been modding Star Wars Empire at War for a long time now. Over 19 years. Such a long... But anyways, a lot has changed in that time, so today I wanted to talk a bit about how modding used to work compared to how things work now. And really just emphasize how much easier things are now than they were back when I started. I've already covered some of the extra capabilities Empire at War itself has in a prior video, thanks to the patches by Petroglyph. But in this video we're going to focus on the development of tools outside of the game, which make things easier to work on now than they were before. First, on the 3D modeling and rigging side, it is way easier to set up models to go in-game. Specifically, the programs used to do it are way more accessible. Initially, Petroglyph only released plugins for one set of programs, 3ds Max version 6, 7, and 8. When their next game, Universe at War, came out, they also released a plugin for 3ds Max 9. The problem is 3ds Max is a professional software tool, and availability for it reflects that. Licenses are incredibly expensive, so with modders mostly just being in the age range of 14 to 20 at the time, it wasn't exactly something most of us could get our hands on. A few people had it through totally legal means, and they tended to have to do all of the rigging, which is basically assigning textures to models, putting the bones that act as firing points on them, and then exporting the model to the .alo format used by Empire at War. Other free software did exist for modeling, like Blender or Wings 3D, which is what I used to create a lot of my first models, like what you're seeing here for the original Syndic Destroyer, but they weren't able to export, so you'd have to send the model to someone else to do a lot of the setup. Eventually I did get a copy of 3ds Max, and they did make it available for students, but part of the problem was that you needed specific versions to mod Empire at War. You couldn't use, say, 3ds Max 2019 or 2020, it had to be 6, 7, 8, or 9. So these were fairly outdated programs, and they didn't exactly play well with modern operating systems or hardware. For example, I had bugs where the viewports which display the model would freeze wherever you clicked, so I would have less and less visible space to edit models and would need to restart the program all the time to clear that up. Eventually, I even ended up having to run virtual machines with older operating systems just to use the program and rig it all. This was honestly one of the big reasons that I personally fell off modding around 2014 for a while, when a lot of larger mod projects were also slowing down, so I don't think I was alone in that. The tools were kinda just too shitty to use. But since then, a modder named Gawkler has created an Alamo plugin for the free open source program Blender, with a lot of other people contributing additional functions to it since its creation. Being free and open source, Blender is far more accessible than 3ds Max, and around 2020 I even completely switched from modeling in 3ds Max to modeling in Blender. This has done a ton, not just to make it easier for us to make models and export them, but also for more people in general to get into creating models. A lot of people on our team probably wouldn't be working on Empire at War mods if not for the fact that Blender became able to do these kinds of exports. Staying with art, texture creation is way easier now than it was 20 years ago as well. Back then, most texturing was done with programs like Photoshop. When you're texturing a model, you basically have a flattened 2D version of all the faces making it up. Think of it like those old cube cutouts you'd do in math classes in like 2nd grade. You'd color it in, cut it out, and then you'd fold it into a 3D shape. 3D models are just like that, but with way more faces. We would have to manually draw in things like hull lines and shading, which you can see Kalo doing here on another of the old Empire of the Hand ships. But now with programs like Substance Painter, Quixel, or even Blender, you're able to essentially make material types you apply to faces, barely having to worry about things like aligning lines that you draw on seams because the program handles it for you. Texturing ships goes way faster this way, and once you have a reasonable material set, you can apply it to multiple ship types. There's still a lot of manual work involved, but it's way more streamlined and less frustrating, and the results tend to be a lot better. Substance Painter is the most common tool within our mod team for this, and it is a paid program, but it's still much cheaper than things like 3ds Max were, and there is of course Blender as a free alternative. The design and coding side has had some significant changes in the years since we started as well. Galactic conquest maps were always pretty tedious to do. You basically have a list of planets and a list of trade routes, so you'd put in all the planet names you want, write down which ones you need connected on a notepad somewhere else, make all those trade routes in XML, go in game and test, then see where you need more connections, rinse and repeat. To get away from this tedious hellscape, we made an internal Galactic conquest editor tool, which includes a GUI allowing us to select planets and create trade routes with a few simple clicks, exporting everything you need to XML. We'd always kind of hoped to release this to the public, and we have shared it with some other mod teams upon request. Some other mod teams have also made their own versions of this kind of thing, but for the most part, ours has always been a kind of minimum viable setup, heavily tied into the development environment of the mod, so it's not something we've been able to publicly release, even though I do kind of hope we can do it sometime. It's just a lot of work would have to go into it. But even as it is, it takes jobs that used to take potentially days and reduces them to a couple hours, leaving even more time to like this video and subscribe for more. There are plenty of other tedious elements that get automated now too. We keep most of our unit stats in a giant spreadsheet, and over the years we've made an effort to automate the transfer of some of those stats to the game files as they get updated, reducing the amount that we have to interact with the actual XML files quite a bit. Nothing is worse than making the same change twice, having to change it once in the spreadsheet and then go in game and having to change it there. So we even have a tool which automatically pulls from the stat sheet to create hardpoint code, for example. This isn't universally applied, it's mostly just the Hapens and Empire of the Hand as a testing ground in Thrawn's Revenge still, but it's also used for every single space unit in Revan's Revenge, making everything much more manageable. So instead of a lot of the time going into just putting in all these numbers in XML code, that development time can go into design and testing. The same thing is done with all of our planet XML code, where a spreadsheet handles the distribution of stats and even gets used to set up some per mod differences in the planets. That spreadsheet even includes some basic galactic conquest planning and mapping, but a tool then takes that list of planets and all their attributes and converts it into XML, along with generating a long list of per planet XML event types that would otherwise require a lot of manual effort to upkeep. And a lot of this stuff is the kind of thing where if you make a mistake, it can be very hard to notice exactly where that mistake is. So there's a lot of debugging time you save as well. The planet spreadsheet handles affiliations for planets in every era in each mod. Basically, when we add planets, we have a list of all the eras for each mod, and then we say who controls it in each era. So when setting up the many progressive maps, instead of doing bad cut and paste jobs with the same barracks and T2B on every New Republic planet, we know which faction each planet will belong to in every era, make the map, and then automatically apply an object which populates the planets with a mix of starting forces and buildings appropriate for the faction, era, and planet. In some maps and on some planets, we do take more direct control over what spawns where, especially historical maps or story-driven campaigns, but especially for our large progressive conquest maps, the basic rules for how stuff should get distributed being applied equally usually ends up being better than someone manually setting up every single planet with what they hope feels right. Especially with something so tedious, people tend to fall into specific patterns, and it ends up being less interesting than what can be generated. With the generation, we're able to focus on the rules for how those things are generated as well. And that can get pretty granular, and it can be made as specific as we want. So anywhere that it becomes important to say what should be where, we're still able to have that level of control. It's not just random slop. This is especially important because it means we can tweak the rules and immediately have the new testable setups on every planet in every one of the 100 plus maps across all of our mods, without having to individually decide whether we need to cut or add a specific instance of an AT-AT spawn or an XR-85 droid tank. If we wanted to test what the mod would be like with much bigger starting forces per planet, that's one value we need to change. And that allows us to change those kinds of things based on in-game settings. For example, if we wanted to have Admiral difficulty spawn more starting forces, we can do that. Another aspect that has made expanding the mods way faster and easier has been the development of Smallpox's Deep Core framework, the name for our coding backend. This is a set of Lua scripts which allows for the setup and use of plugins, which simplifies most Lua coding and allows for easy communication between different plugins, and even has easy ways to handle game information being transferred between different modes. For example, when you capture a unit in tactical using the boarding mechanic, the Lua framework makes it easy to communicate between the scripts that handles the tactical elements of that and spawning it on the galactic level. In the past, most different functions would require their own script, and that could be very cumbersome to set up. a lot of the work would need to be redone each time. Say you wanted to have two different mechanics that function on a timer. Outside of the framework, if you wanted to do this, then you would need to set up that timer in each script. But one of the things the framework does, for example, is keep track of when each cycle is ending in the Galactic mode. And then if it ends, it checks with all the plugins for whether any of them is waiting for a cycle change, and then passes on through to whatever relevant functions are there. Now, everything from the build filters to the text at the top and left of the screen to government mechanics, it's all tied together and works together with minimal setup needed when you're making a new mechanic. It even makes me look like I know how to code. But the last thing we'll talk about today is version control software. This certainly isn't a new part of software development, but it's something we weren't using 20 years ago on Thrawn's Revenge. Initially, any changes which were being made by any dev had to be made in a local copy of the mod or a local XML file. Then that file would be sent to me over MSN Messenger at first and later Skype, and I'd compile it into my copy of the mod. Then every week or month, I would build a copy of the mod and upload it so the other devs could download it to play or test and update their own local version. Especially before I left for university in 2010, I was using very bad satellite internet way out in the middle of nowhere where I lived. So uploading those for the other devs and trying to upload releases for the public could sometimes take overnight, and then the uploads would often just fail and I'd have to try again. Now we have things like GitHub, which basically keeps the entire mod on a central server which everyone can then download from. And when you make a change, you just push a couple buttons and it goes out to everyone else in that repository. You can even make branches, which allow you to make and test a set of changes without interrupting what's going on the main branch. But just as important as this easier distribution, GitHub tracks every change everyone makes. So if a bug comes up, you can go back to any previous state of the mod to figure out when it went wrong. Before, you'd just have this one pile of files with no idea what might have changed or gone wrong at all. It wasn't rare to have to do a complete rebuild of the mod, coding it almost from scratch just to solve one simple issue. There's still a lot of work involved in modding, but kids these days, and me these days, have it way easier than kids when kids meant me, and I wouldn't trade that for anything. That's going to do it for now. I hope you found this interesting. Remember to leave a like and subscribe if so. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time.